I'm really excited to welcome Ben Rosenberg from ChurnZero. He is a Senior Director of Customer Support, Enablement, and Community. So great to have you today, Ben, and welcome to our podcast.
Thanks so much, Scott. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, we were just talking about Ben's in Phoenix. I'm in Utah, and it's just starting to snow. It's 71 degrees for him. So very different worlds we're living in, it seems like today. But Ben, one of the things I wanted to start it off a little bit by chatting about was just your kind of career. You've pursued a couple of different areas in customer experience, and it sounds like you have quite a lot now. And I'd love to know at the beginning, had you been thinking, I'd love to work in this area, or what inspired you? How'd you end up here?
That's a really good question. And I think for me, I'm the type of person, I love to host people. I like to help people, and just kind of at the core of who I am that's a big part of how I operate and how I, show my love and gratitude to people as well. And I, like many people, started my career kind of in the restaurant hospitality, did a little bit of retail. And the first maybe 10 years or so of my, quote unquote, professional career was with a large bank and brokerage, Charles Schwab. And that was really my first entry into full on customer experience type work. And I found that I really enjoyed it. Just that sort of gratitude of being able to help someone through an issue or solve a problem, and just kind of see the end result of that. It's something I've always had a lot of passion for. And through my career, I would say the other thing I'm the most passionate about is really just leadership development. It's one of my favorite parts of my role. It's what I like spending a lot of time on with my folks, here at ChurnZero and otherwise. And so I get a lot of, satisfaction out of taking the things that I've seen and done and learned and sharing that across the board too. So those are probably the two top things that come to mind. But I think it's just always kind of been who I am.
Do you feel like, one of the things, so I grew up in New Jersey, but also worked in the Bay Area in sort of the tech world. I tended to find that a lot of the professionals, within my dad's network and sort of finance, and then also just tech in the Bay Area, there was a lot of this desire to help kind of pay it forward. People had originally helped you. Had you found that early in your career, there were folks who were willing to help and kind of either mentor or train you, and maybe that's what got you there?
Yeah, definitely. I've had a ton of people like that I can think of in my career. And, I always sort of joke or tell people when, if someone's departing a company, or, I'll sometimes say this in interviews, if it's a candidate I really like, but maybe not a great fit for whatever reason, CX especially, and CX in the SaaS world is a small one. You'll be surprised where paths cross down the line and all that stuff too. But mentorship has been a huge part of my growth. I attribute a lot of, my ability to kind of lead different teams and do a lot of what I've done in my career to some of that mentorship. And I like to think I do a pretty good job of trying to pay that forward, like you mentioned. I've got a pretty large network of folks that I talk to pretty regularly and try to kind of help navigate with them as well. And like I mentioned, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that personally too. So it's definitely been a huge factor for me as well.
Oh, super cool. And on the leadership side, I'm sure leadership is probably same for you. Part of it's experience, part of it is practice, part of it is maybe observational. So I found that, at least for me, when I worked for Facebook, I'd see a lot of great examples of leadership. I've read some great books over the year. There's one behind me. It basically is sort of like the CEO within. Mm-hmm. And as you've developed your leadership styles or strategies, have there been maybe some inputs, some themes, some areas that really helped you figure out your approach to leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I try to sort of preach and coach to my leaders is there's not one good or best leadership style. And the most successful and effective leaders that I've had the pleasure to work with, I think, are the best at sort of taking the right style for the situation or for the moment. So when I talk about this with newer leaders, an analogy I use a lot is just kind of adding arrows to your quiver, right? There's a lot of situations you might run into, and being able to sort of use a different approach for whatever the case might be has served me really well. And so a piece of advice that I usually give is just go talk to other leaders. And, I try to encourage folks to like talk to leaders they like and have a similar style to, but also try to find people where you're like, ooh, I probably would have never done the thing that this person did. And like, I usually challenge someone of like, you'll probably learn something. And even if what you take away is like, oh, yep, I would never do that, even though they did, like, that's a thing to just kind of keep in the back of your mind. But what I find more often than not, especially with situations like that, is you'll learn something from someone who has a totally different approach, and it'll maybe tweak your perspective a little bit on how to approach a similar situation. So that's usually one of the main things that I try to focus on. Like you, I love to read, podcast, all of it. I just try to soak up as many different thoughts and opinions as I can. And I wouldn't say I have one overarching theme or style. I'm really big on transparency. So, I think that's pretty paramount sort of tentpole way to think about communication and building trust. So, I like to talk about that with my team is like, there's 1% of stuff in my brain that's, sensitive or HRE or really can't be shared or whatever. But outside of that, like the other 99%, there's no value in me sort of hoarding that in my head and not sharing. So I always try to make sure my team's got the full picture of what's going on or why we're deciding or doing the things that we're doing. And, like I want to be challenged, in the same way that I would challenge folks on my team too. So it just kind of helps open up some different perspectives and all that good stuff too.
I love that. I love that you've broken it down into a percentage, like 1%, 99. That's terrific. I frequently feel the same way. Where if people understand, at least maybe they don't understand, but at least you've shared the information to help them hear, what your goal, your motivation is behind it. Maybe you can't convince them. Maybe they can't actually understand, but at least they know where you're at, what you're thinking.
Sure. I think another aspect of that too is like, that is healthy, right? Like in the past role, I'm thinking of a couple experiences of like, there's a right time for that sort of like debate and, like, hey, like push me on this, or let's really like air it out there. And, like that has oftentimes changed, outcomes of whatever it is that we're talking about. I think the thing to be mindful of there is like, once you leave that Zoom or that room or whatever, like it's got to be a united front. Because even if you don't agree with where we landed, like as soon as there's any, sort of like fracture in sort of how we're presenting or talking about or whatever, then that's where you really start to lose credibility. But yeah, those have been some of my favorite conversations in my career. Just, I have a spirited opinion about something. Somebody's got maybe a different opinion about it. And like, as long as you do it in a healthy and respectful way, like I think those can be really fun and usually come out of it on the other side of it for the better.
I totally agree, especially on the, disagreement side. It's especially challenging as a leader who works with other leaders, which, sounds like you do, where you need to make sure you communicate the same message, even if 3 out of 5 of you are like, this is the worst message ever. I'd love to know a little bit about, so it looks like that, you're a remote worker like me. Is that fair to say? Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'd love to know about, some of the things that are important to you as a remote leader in building your team culture. Like, how do you actually do it? What's important to you? What are some of your practices or approaches to things?
Yeah, it's been interesting, I'm sure for many others over the last few years. ChurnZero is kind of interesting in the sense that we've been remote first pretty much since inception. So when I joined the organization, everyone was like pretty darn good at it. And I was still trying to figure out, how to build a team and lead remotely more effectively. I think some things that we've done a little more tactically. We do like a daily stand-up, which is common maybe on like a dev or engineering type team, but maybe a little less common on the support side. So we do something like that every day. It's pretty casual. It's like, hey, what's going on? Here's any big issues for the day, anything you're seeing in cases that might impact anybody else. And it's honestly been one of the biggest like sort of team morale and engagement boosts that we've had in quite a while, where it's just like a sort of low stakes forum for people to just kind of, I think, recreate a little bit of like what they might have in office, and as they're getting coffee and all that kind of stuff. So that's been really successful for us. We also do sort of a very like optional come and hang out for a few minutes if you want towards the end of the week, where a lot of people just kind of come and hang out and work on cases in like an open Zoom room together, or kind of do some
cool.
work sessions
Okay.
together, and we shoot the crap a little bit here and there and all that kind of stuff too. So we try to recreate as much of that as we can, and like for me, I take a very like humanistic approach to work, where it's like everyone's out there, they got their own lives going on, like we're dealing with SaaS support. It's not, life or death situations in most cases. And so we try to have fun and keep it light where we can too. And it's like hard to sort of give like specific advice for, but, we try to just reframe our work and what we do. And, we take it seriously. We want to deliver a great experience. We have, high goals for expectations and all that stuff too, but you got to have a little bit of fun and, remember that everyone's doing what they can with what they got most of the time,
So while I do agree with you on the, it's not life or death, I do think sometimes people, particularly customers, feel like your software bugs, problems, or issues are absolutely like life or death, right?
Yeah.
So it could be tough. So have you found that either as a leader or as an IC, like, is there like a good way to handle the immense amount of stress that just builds up, where you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's driving me crazy, because like they're totally justified in how they feel, but like you have to manage it and not freak out at them, right? Like, is there a good way to do it? What have you guys done?
Yeah, it's I don't know if I have a perfect answer on that. I've had some experience in my career where we deal with like things like payroll or health insurance, where it's like, like an issue can have a really meaningful impact on somebody's life, right? So, I think like, I'm probably not going to say anything revolutionary here, but things like just kind of taking ownership of the issue, like understanding, making sure that all the different inputs or whatever to kind of get to a resolution is really important. In terms of like, how do you personally handle or deal with that or kind of manage the stress? Like, as an IC, what I try to tell my folks is like, hopefully you're at a point where like when you shut down your computer for the day, like you shouldn't be carrying any of that stress with you outside. Like, there's always going to be cases to work. Some of them are going to be harder than others. Customers are going to span the gamut of, friendly to less than friendly or whatever. And, like I kind of like that sort of diversity of like, never really know what my day is going to be like tomorrow, even at my level as a leader, right? And it's, I think, the same thing for the ICs. So I think it's a little more about perspective, right? If you kind of go into it like, all right, I might have some gnarly ones today, like that's part of what's going to make the day go by. Or, I really love that feeling of, taking a really gnarly, complicated issue and getting to a full resolution or whatever. So those are some things that have worked for me. Again, and personally, I just try to like not take it too seriously. Obviously, I bring a level of professionalism and, want to deliver a great experience. But I try to separate where I can.
I love how you highlighted that you really never know what you're going to get that day. I think that's a really important part of work sometimes. It's like, if it's exactly the same, it's really consistent, it could probably be pretty boring. For sure. So that's probably one of the greatest aspects of some of the work that you do for sure. Could you talk a little bit about, for example, let's say you highlighted really well how, you have to obviously set expectations and you have performance expectations for your team. For managing a team, kind of setting that culture, I'd love to know, like, for us, for example, I feel like, helping people just know what their goals are and then reminding them and then talking about them seems pretty helpful. How have you found the right reasonable approach to sort of like setting those expectations and then helping hold people to account for those? Like, I don't know if you're a brutal taskmaster with a whip or, what you're like, but, curious.
I would say like, it's interesting. And I think we might talk a little bit about, some teams that are maybe struggling or coming into an environment like that. And I think the first thing for me is always like, do they have the tools to be successful? And a lot of times the answer to that question, if an org or a team is struggling, is like, oftentimes no, right? Like they've just been sort of expected to figure a thing out or, learn how a piece of the product works or support customers in a certain way. And it's like, ooh, they don't even know, or they don't even have the things that they need to be successful. So usually that's where I like to start, is just kind of understand and evaluate, like, what's the training and onboarding like? What sort of like documentation and resources does the team have? How have they been, expected to know and understand this info in the past? And then, okay, great. Now, how do we make sure we get that in front of them at the right time or in the right kind of period as they're learning? And once you sort of check those two boxes, then it's more about like, okay, now what are the expectations and how do we hold people kind of accountable to that? One of the things that we struggled with here when I first joined, and I assume this is similar for a lot of folks out there too, like ChurnZero is really broad. It's big, it's complicated. There's a lot of customization, there's a lot of automation, ingest a lot of data. No two cases are very similar for us here. And so one of the things we struggled with is like, how much should a typical frontline agent know about our product, or what types of cases should they be able to handle? So the approach that we've taken here that I think works pretty well for us is we kind of look at it more based on like competencies. So we kind of broken out each of our areas of the product into different competency levels. And then the expectation is that you have a certain number, certain level of competency in a certain number of areas of the product. So if you gravitate more towards one part of the product and it makes a little bit more sense for you than something else, then that's great. And you can kind of focus there a little bit more. So we tried to give a little bit of flexibility in the sense of trying to understand that like some folks are a little bit more technical and they like to be in SQL and JavaScript and do those types of cases. So we tried to build our growth plan for the team around that. Where I like this structure a lot for us here is it also is kind of a built-in career progression plan. So we do a lot of like coaching, and our year-end process is built around like, great, you started the year here, where did you add some competency, where do we still have some opportunity to go, and then sort of our role progression within the support organization follows a similar path. So in order to be a great candidate for a senior or a second tier representative, you've got to have, you know, a certain level of competency that's a little bit higher in a certain number of areas that's a little bit more. So it really kind of puts all that into a nice little package for us on the support side. On the enablement side of my job, which we haven't talked too much about yet, it's kind of interesting, right? We are doing some 2025 planning right now. I'm responsible for our external enablement, so all of our customer training and sort of enablement on that side, and then also our internal enablement. So how do we get the CX org ready for process change or product change or things that we're doing internally? And you know, one of the things that has been a little bit of a challenge for us on the internal enablement side is like, what are the right metrics for a role like that? I've seen them at almost every SaaS company. It's kind of that like person or small group of people who just kind of are the glue. They end up kind of becoming like the project managers for whatever's happening. And, you know, it's a little bit tougher to like, we're even trying to plan for what are we going to work on this quarter? And like, it'll probably change 5 times in the quarter. So what we're trying to think about there is like a little bit more of like, how effective is the stuff that we're delivering rather than we're going to deliver X, Y, Z for the quarter. So we've tried to kind of rebuild some goals around that. And then we're trying to build some goals around like, how do we operate and execute on different projects? So we're looking a little bit more in that direction rather than, you know, here's like, we're going to deliver X automations, or we're going to, you know, do 5 trainings for the CSM team this month. It's a little bit more of like, what's the quality? Are the behaviors changing because of what we're doing? So we're looking at some metrics more like that.
Yeah, so I'd love to. I think the metrics part is really interesting because you know, I think one comment one of our product managers made the other day was just sort of like this idea of building products, you know, for a use case, building it for revenue, building it for happiness. I think there's a bunch of things that are there particular, I don't know, outcomes where you guys are like, all right, we always want to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe within the support world, it's this enablement, it's that. But how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, on the support side, at the metric level, I would say we're not doing anything super revolutionary there. We're looking at, you know, things like satisfaction scores, response times, that kind of a thing.
Right.
Like I mentioned, a lot of our cases are pretty research intensive. So kind of back to that documentation and knowledge side, one of the things that we're looking at pretty heavily is like, what's our total like amount of agent working time per case? It was quite high for us here when I joined. It's not the number one number, but I look at that as a really good metric of like, have we as a leadership team done the right things to make sure that we have the right people in the right roles, that they're enabled properly, that they have the tools to do their job effectively? If we do all those things right, like that number should be going down for us. And
actually, just really quick, I would be super interested to know more about this total amount of agent working time. So like, what does that mean exactly? And how do you kind of generally keep track of it?
Yeah, so it's not a perfect number, but we use like within our ticketing system, we have sort of a widget that runs behind the scenes that looks at like how long was this sort of case open and active for them while they're working on it.
Got it.
There's some imperfections in exactly how it tracks, but if you look at it over a large period of time for a number of cases, you're usually pretty good. So it's our metric for like how much time are they having to spend like researching, reading through documentation, pulling up customer information in the product, all that good stuff is a pretty good metric there. And then, if they are getting quicker in certain case types, then we know that we can draw a pretty good correlation that like, okay, this is a topic they understand, they have a little bit more competency and all that kind of stuff. So that's an important one for us. It ties into the overall customer experience, right? Like how long are they waiting and what's our total resolution time for the case and all that kind of stuff is a little bit of an output of that too. But yeah, that's been a big one we've been focused on the support side for sure.
Cool. Okay.
And I like this a lot too, because it's like, it is on the agents ultimately, but not directly, right? Like if you could put the absolute best kick-ass support person in a role, but if they don't have the information they need or the tools they need or whatever, like they're not going to be able to solve stuff a lot quicker either. So I look at this as equally as a reflection of leadership and what we're doing to support the team as much as it is like the agents individually too.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you said earlier that it definitely resonated with me was this idea of like agents, for example, not needing to have all of the context, all of the information for every product, because like you said, your product is significant and there's a lot to know and to do. And rather than be like frustrated or annoyed at their competence or quality, segmenting it out, being specific, that certainly helps a lot. So, one of the things that I'm very interested in, I was talking with a friend yesterday, actually, who fully aside, but he's looking for a customer success role. And we kind of talked about how customer success, depending on which company you talk to, is very different. It's sort of a rapidly evolving industry. I'd love, from your perspective, I feel like what is customer success? How do you view it? And like, what's been changing the most, or what do you think the next thing is that's going to kind of be significant here?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. Like I have always looked at customer success as a little bit of a pendulum, and it kind of swings back and forth every, 5-ish years or so. It feels like is maybe the time frame, but it's like a little bit of like, how much are they dollars, revenue, contract terms driven versus adoption and engagement and, product depth and stickiness. And, in my experience, like the teams that balance those two things fairly well seem to be the most successful, but there's some really strong arguments for both sides of that equation in my mind, right? Like contract negotiations and talking numbers and getting executive buy-in, that is a pretty different skill set from can someone train and adopt and build long-term, client success. So, there's a lot of interesting opinions on kind of where that lives and falls. I think what we're seeing, we do like a really big CX study every year. We publish the results on our website, and those are all like really, really interesting for me because what we're seeing is more companies are moving towards dollar ownership within CX over the last between the two studies. I think some of that is probably economic realities of probably can't have like a dedicated account management and a CS team, right? So I think there's for sure some of that over the last year, but I think that is kind of it's always an interesting like push and pull, and that's been around forever. I think we're seeing customers and the people in my network, and I did some consulting and stuff before coming to ChurnZero. Like I think where there's a lot more serious effort is kind of how do you digitize to some level of customer experience, right? So AI tools are obviously expanding in their capabilities, automation, all those types of things. But I think the balance that a lot of companies are trying to find right now, big and small, is it's hard to manage smaller SMB customers at scale. Like it's an easy thing to throw a lot of people or bodies at. It's almost impossible to make that economically viable most of the time. And so the types of companies I've worked for, which are usually, Series C, Series D, or pre-IPO, it's almost always the same problem, which is like, we built up a pretty big base of all these really small customers. We haven't really figured out how to service them effectively and economically. And like, we want to move up market maybe because that feels easier, or we can have bigger contracts or whatever, Right. So I think like, what's interesting to me is like the the barrier to entry to design those types of programs now is so much lower than it was even 5 or 3 years ago, right? Because the technology has improved pretty significantly. Obviously I'm a little bit biased. I was a ChurnZero customer before I worked here too, but
cool.
I think our platform does a great job of if you need a pretty good all-in-one platform that can do a lot of things really, really well, we're a great option. And there are so many other sort of add-on or supplementary things that you can use within a CX organization to really build a pretty sophisticated, automated customer engagement program for a relatively small amount of money, right? So I think that has been really interesting over the last few years. Obviously, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about AI stuff in general. I think that'll be really interesting to see where things head. But one of my hypotheses over the next 5 or 10 years is I think human-led support will be a little bit more of a competitive advantage choice for customers rather than must-have necessity. I don't know where that's going to shake out. I think it'll be really interesting to kind of watch and see where that heads. But I think that'll be interesting to watch for sure.
I 100% agree with the human-led or human-assisted with AI. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of this sentiment around how can I replace my customer support team? How do I replace my customer success? And anytime I am interacting with a company that seems to do this, whether I call their support, I give you an example. I have Google Fiber. I called their support. They had a great customer support AI agent that spoke with a voice, and it was really incredible. But it just, I don't know. It was a little complicated. And similarly, when I go to a website and it's just a chatbot only, and the chatbot's not great. We're guilty of this sometimes too. But it's so, I don't know, energizing when you finally get to somebody after having that tough. But it makes me wonder if we're going to make the problem really bad before it starts to get better.
Yeah, I do think there's going to be some of that. I mean, I've had some a poorly implemented AI solution is just so painful. It's one of the things we've struggled a little bit here internally. How are we going to deploy something like that for our team? I have yet to find something that works well enough for B2B applications where it's I feel great about putting this in front of a customer. There's some pretty good tools out there, but my sense has always been that these are great for B2C kind of things where it's a little more repeatable. Where's my order? What's the delivery status? I need to make a change to a thing that I can just go grab a piece of information from another system. Great, that's getting better. The conversation side of it's getting pretty good. All that stuff seems to be there. But to answer most of the questions that our customers have, you need to have what's the context on how they're set up? How did they configure this part of the thing? Where are we getting their data from? Right? It's I can pull some of those inputs in, but the sort of connectivity of all that stuff just isn't quite there yet to a point where it's this is going to deflect half of our cases or anything. We just haven't found anything out there in the market like that. And to your point, it's do we even want to do that, right? Is that how we want to be known for sort of delivering an experience for our customers who are, largely doing the same type of work that we are, which is kind of an interesting dynamic for us specifically. But I think that'll be really interesting. And it's cool. And I love technology. I'm a huge nerd for all that kind of stuff. And it's been really cool to kind of see it as an operator and administrator of a lot of these types of tools. But I think there's still quite a bit of room to go for them, but the rate at which things are improving is, pretty stunning to see in a really cool way.
Yeah, I 100% agree how quickly it's changing. I frequently have videos that my sister sends me on, social tools, Instagram or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know if that was real or not. That's crazy.
For sure.
So for how about for you guys? So maybe specifically from a ChurnZero product perspective, when you guys are thinking about what it looks like to make your CSMs just incredibly effective, what are you finding that they're excited about that you guys are thinking about either building or you plan to build or you've already stated you're going to build? I don't want to get into any secret sauce stuff.
No, totally. We are actually doing we do sort of one of the things I love about our chief product officer. She does like a big presentation every year for customers. That's like our full roadmap. So she goes into pretty good amount of detail about like what we're working on, all that good stuff. So I don't want to steal any thunder from that, which is upcoming here in a couple of weeks. But I would say like we're largely AI focused for the year. It's a big component of our product roadmap. Some of the themes that we're kind of thinking about are looking at things like overall customer relationship and sentiment, right? Like the tools are getting really good in terms of analyzing communication and back and forth. So we're doing some really interesting things with that. One of the really cool features we're doing some internal testing on right now, so I'm geeking out over it, is looking at like the relationships that you have with different people in sort of contacts at different points of the company. So got some cool stuff happening there. We have a lot of AI stuff integrated into our platform already, so we have a lot of enhancements coming in that regard too. But yeah, really it's like we view AI in terms of how CSMs might use it as like a little bit of like a supplementary tool, right? Like how can we make their job a little bit easier or faster or serve them the information that they need? So we're working on a lot of stuff like that for sure. But yeah, internally, it's one of the, whereas like customer, we use like quite heavily, actually on both sides of my role. So for the support team, like I mentioned, a lot of our cases are really complex. We do a lot of like asynchronous video. So rather than like, here's 10 screenshots, we'll record a video in the customer's instance and kind of walk them through whatever's going on. One of our goals for this year on the internal enablement side, we got a lot of feedback this year that like, hey, like an hour-long meeting or training session, it's hard to pay attention to or hard to find time for or whatever. Great, we're going to meet you where you want to be met. So we're starting to do a lot more training through video as well, where it's like watch it at your leisure. One of our little tricks is we throw a little like non sequitur fact or nugget in there, and we we'll ask like, hey, did you see the thing? Or the one we did in the last one was like, what was Ben's favorite color? And I said my favorite color was orange. So we do stuff like that as just a way to like kind of keep things fun and light and maybe a little bit more engaging too. But yeah, that's been a big part of how we've deployed Site internally too, and we find that works pretty well as well.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, how about on the I don't know if this is something that you own or you work in, but sort of on like, obviously there's like the frontline support, helping create training documentation, but like when it comes to maybe like a support center or your help center, whatever you want to call it, do you guys find that like people watch videos for your product or do they prefer to read? I mean, I'm more just generally curious what you guys find.
Yeah, it's a good question. So yes, I am responsible for our like customer academy, which is like training courses. That's a lot of video driven content. The knowledge base we kind of co-own with the product team here. I would say we get this feedback all the time on the academy side, which is like, I want more hands-on type content. So we have a few courses that we're experimenting that uses kind of a tool where it puts customers into like basically a dummy account environment, and it's a little bit of like a click along kind of experience, which has been cool. But it's funny, we were talking about this last week. We're thinking about some like different modalities. So we originally were a little more focused on video last year. This year, I think it'll be a little bit more hands-on. We're also talking about audio formats as maybe an interesting, like, let's experiment with that a little bit. So we're going to play around with that there too. But yeah, I'd say more often than not, we get a lot of either video or hands-on are the two things that our customers are looking for.
I think it totally makes sense. At least for me, whenever I have to fix anything, my wife frequently makes fun of me, but I'm like, instantly I go to YouTube, right? Sure. Yeah. and the other thing too is I listen to a lot of podcasts because I'm driving around. I've got 4 kids, so having it, and I love the idea of the audio modality. So anyway, I'd love to hear more about that when you're done with it. Let's see. So you've had a lot of great experience around sort of building teams, helping build this sort of products, help your customers understand them, and you've had, I think, from today at least, some really cool insights on the AI aspects of implementation in your company. What do you think, like, if you were to start over, if you were to build your own company, or start a company from scratch, what's your like one thing you'd want to prioritize above everything else? So like let's assume that you had a product, the product is great, people are happy about it. What would you do? What would you care about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think like Uh, I would answer that maybe in a slightly different way, which is like, I think where things go wrong is you try to be like too many things to too many different people, right? Like it's really sexy and attractive to try to say like, oh, could we, you know, add a bigger addressable market or a larger potential user base, and that can work, and that's important. You do have to grow, right? Like there are realities of growing a business that may necessitate some of those things, but I would say like just kind of being true to who you are and what you want to be is really important to me. And then like, you know, I think I'm maybe a little biased because of my role in the post-sale organization, but you know, I think listening to customers is really important, right? Like I'm maybe a little unique as a support leader. I want sales selling ahead of where the product is a little bit, right? And like kind of pushing the product from that perspective, because the reality is like that's where customers want to go. So like, let's try to get them there. So it doesn't really bother me when it's like, oh, sales told them we could do X and we can do X minus one right now. How do we fill the gap? Yeah, I think that is really important. I like to think of like support specifically as kind of the central nervous system for the organization. Like we kind of have the, you know, pain receptors and the joy receptors, and we can kind of relay that back to the rest of the business. So I view that as a really important part of what we do. And I think keeping that as part of your company ethos is really important. And, you know, like have a good product, right? Like it's funny, we talk about this a lot in CX where it's like, oh, like, this customer churned because of whatever, and it's like a lot of times like maybe the version wasn't a good product or wasn't a good fit or they weren't using it, and it's like there's nothing a CSM is going to do in some of those cases too. So yeah, obviously having a good product is important there too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like every time I and this is more, you know, from I guess trying to be a better customer success manager myself, but every time I look at a customer cancellation, a churn reason, I'm sort of like Dr. House, if you've seen that show. He just tends to not believe the reason. Yeah. And I'm like, my product must suck. I must have done something so badly. And then I email them and I'm like, hey, I hear, you know, I understand you said this. Could you tell me a little bit more? And actually I offer people a lot of the time. I'm like, I'll give you a $50 gift card if you just like take 10 minutes with me and talk with me about it. And I feel like that helps a lot. I love your point though around the customer nervous system being, you know, basically the feedback that's coming from using the product, and then also just talking to customers. I talked with a CEO just last week, and he said the way that he basically came up with the idea of his business was like he said, first he thought about the TAM, and then second he started talking to people, and as he talked to potential customers of some of his ideas, they really helped guide him where he could go. And then basically it was funny because he basically was saying, I am not the smartest man. I'm not like a genius by any means or anything like that. We just talk to customers and they helped us build something awesome, which I think is really consistent. Let's see. So I think, you know, completely moving away from some of the business stuff, the work stuff. You have this love, this personal love, woodworking, being outside. And I'd love to know a little bit about the woodworking because I'm a bad woodworker myself, but you know, where are you on the scale? Are you making like incredible stuff? Or are you just goofing around? What's it like?
I'm definitely towards the bad side of that spectrum. It was my sort of quarantine hobby pickup. So I've been doing it for 3-4 years at this point. It's interesting. We had talked about maybe like, how does this sort of influence my leadership or work style? So I've been pondering this question for quite a while because it's really quite interesting to me. I think like, you know, it's funny, I think a common woodworking thing, which is like, oh, cool, I want to get into this. I'm going to go buy like all of the tools, right? I'm going to go buy like a nice table saw or whatever. And then it's like, cool, I have this pretty nice piece of equipment. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing or like anything like that. Like, I'm just going to try to build a box. You know, like, I think one of the things I would take away from that as I think about how it's maybe influenced my mindset towards work is like, there's a lot to be said for just kind of experience and learning through doing and not expecting perfection up front. Like, I think about some of the first things I tried to make, you know, out of wood were just, you know, like laughably bad. But like I learned something, right? Like, oh, if I hold it like this, like it's not going to be very straight. And you know, like if I don't make sure my measurements are accurate on either side, like it's never going to look good regardless of what I try to do. So I think it's a little bit of just kind of like you have to go into some new experiences with that mindset of like, I'm not going to be great at this to start. I'm going to mess it up, but I'm going to probably try to learn something from each of those mistakes. And I think like the other thing I take away from that is like, you can be your own worst critic, especially in woodworking. Like I will notice any imperfection or, oh gosh, if I could like re-glue this up in a certain way, like, and then like, my wife or whoever will look at it and she's like, are you kidding me? Like I would have never noticed that in 100 years or whatever. So, so I think that's the other side of it too, is like, you got to be able to live with your imperfections and, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I like to joke with someone in my enablement team about this a lot here, where it's like, it doesn't all have to be pixel perfect, right? Like, let's get it out there. Let's get some feedback. Let's understand what works, and let's take the things that work and drop the things that don't. And I try to take that same approach on the woodworking side as I do on the work side.
I love it. I think perfect is the enemy of good. Just, it's like chef's kiss. Great. So final question for you. This is sort of going back to the beginning when you talked about providing guidance to those who are looking for roles. If you think about like yourself or somebody that's younger, they're aspiring to find a role in customer experience, what would your advice be? What kind of advice would you share?
Yeah, I can speak to what has worked well for me, and that's just be curious. Like, I think one of the companies I had a lot of sort of vertical growth in, I would attribute to like, I heard something was not going well, or like someone needed help somewhere. I'm like, cool, like, can I help? Like, tell me where you're stuck. Let me learn about this part of the business or this other team or this process. So that has been a tip that I like to share, is just be curious, try to learn as much as you can about the business and the product and every other's team or other teams in the business. From a leadership perspective, one of the things I like to do, especially if I'm like new to a company, is like ask the other leaders, like, hey, what are you struggling with in your team? Like, is there anything my team is doing to make your day-to-day worse? Or is there anything I can maybe help with that, you're kind of stuck on or whatever? And I think like just having that understanding of like what everyone is facing or what challenges they're trying to solve for, I think you'll find a lot of times that like, oh, like I might actually be able to help on this, or we have an interesting thing like that here between the support and implementation teams, where it's like, oh, like we could actually probably handle this a little differently in support, and maybe that takes some time off of your guys' plate. So I think those are things that have been helpful for me. I think like the people who have the most success in customer success more generally are just customer centric. Like, it sounds really stupid and like straightforward, but like that's it. Just care about your people, try to do what you can, like try to get creative with solutions. And I think a really strong CSM can look and act and perform in a lot of different ways, which I think is one of the most cool things about that type of role. Like, yeah, you could be great at the product and be, like a super nerdy whiz at, helping every single customer fix all of their nitty gritty things and be really successful as a CSM that way. Or you could be like a full on relationship person who can, get anyone open and talking for an hour and, never talk about the product at all and be really successful that way too. So it's one of the things I really enjoy about this CX world more generally, is you can find success no matter who you are.
Awesome. Well, I love those great final closing thoughts, Ben. And just to wrap up, I just wanted to again say thank you for joining us today and sharing these great thoughts.
Cool. Thanks. Always a pleasure. And enjoy being on.
All righty.